do this.
What is this expected? Bam, that was a good one. Huh? What's that?
Hold successful. Data extracted. 2 override tokens found.
If you've ever browsed the Steam store looking for your next VR title, then chances are you've stumbled upon H3VR. After all, with its overwhelmingly positive ratings and large active player base, it's really tough to miss. You're probably wondering if this game is just a sandbox where you shoot some random objects with guns, or whether there is more to this. It's not an easy task to categorize H3VR. While the main focus of H3VR is on the gun simulation, the game makes no compromise in terms of gameplay and fun, with a wide variety of game modes to choose from. But first, let's talk about what really makes H3VR stand out. The amount of details and care that has been put into guns is very remarkable, and is definitely unmatched by any other VR title. The gun models and textures are top tier, and no detail has been overlooked. All of that translates directly into the gun controls and gameplay. Anything you could do with a gun in real life can be done in H3VR. Cocking the hammer, which will actually affect your trigger travel, pushing the slide release, switching fire modes, adjusting your stock, and even loading ammo directly into the chamber. On top of that, all parts of the gun react directly to physics, meaning you can knock out AK magazines or rack the slide of a pistol against a wall or a table, or even against one another. There's a ton of other cool details, and we could talk about this all time, such as the progressive triggers on some weapons like the P90 or the Styro. The fire mode of the gun will change depending on how hard you're gonna be pulling the trigger. It's amazing to see the level of dedication the developer had, which is even down to the amount of smoke and the location of the smoke coming out of the barrel after shooting, or even out of the chamber after taking multiple consecutive shots. The amount of smoke and the color of smoke depends on what kind of gun you're handling. So if you're handling some older black powder kind of guns, you're gonna see much more smoke than modern weapons. It's really mind-blowing to see how a single developer managed to achieve such level of details while having the largest amount of guns I've ever seen in a VR game. Maybe even in any game, ranging from flintlock pistols to modern weaponry, going through multiple guns of the World War I and II, while also having a ton of quirky surprises along the way. You're not even restricted to using one magazine per gun. If it fits the mag well and has the same caliber, then you could use it. Something I never saw in any game before. The variation of ammo type is also mind-blowing. Hollow point, incendiary, armor-piercing, tracer, you name it, it's gonna be in the game. And those come to play when dealing with armored hostiles, which is something we are going to talk about more later. Of course, that goes without saying, you will always be able to do the juicy, satisfying HK slaps. Now, in order to free up some more controls for the guns in H3VR, by default, it uses your thumbsticks to control the weapons, while the buttons are used for navigation. While this can be disabled, I highly recommend against it, since you will be losing a lot of controls over your weapon. An example would be Quick Bolt, which allows me to quickly switch to controlling the bolt without having to lift my grip.
Encryption neutralized.
The game features the biggest amount of locomotion options I've seen before, from thumbstick motion to button presses, including teleport and all sorts of weird locomotion options. Ever since I tried Arm Swinger in H3VR, it has been my personal favorite locomotion option in any VR title, and the implementation in H3VR is top notch.
Tis only a flesh wound.
Now that we've covered the guns and the locomotion, let's talk about the main part of any game, the gameplay. As mentioned before, the main game mode of H3VR is basically considered to be take and hold, where you go on runs and find encryption nodes and hold them down while defending yourself against enemies and waiting for the encryption to shoot the target. You start the run usually with weaker weapons and slowly progress your way using buy stations to get more upgrades as well as new weaponry. Although there is a specific progression, there is a huge R&D factor on what kind of gun you're going to be getting, which makes each run unique. The progression depends on what kind of character you're playing. Each character has its own unique weapons and attachments. For example, you could play a character that follows World War II progression or the Vietnam War, or even wield your furious but not very effective big iron as a cowboy, or as the game would like to call them, a cow winner. That also means you will be put up against enemies from that era, with their own guns and equipment. The more holds you capture, the better weaponry and equipment you are going to have access to, and the tougher and more numerous the enemies will be. In modern characters you will start seeing more armored enemies and even some with Riot shields. If you have a full power armor-piercing round, then fighting those enemies will be a breeze. But if you're stuck with some 9mm weapon, your bullets will barely tickle their armor. Your main objective during the hold is not necessarily to eliminate the enemies, but to succeed in decrypting the node, which is done by shooting various types of targets. Standard, agile, regenerative, swarm, recursive, hardened. So sometimes it boils down to finding the right spot to hold, where you don't have to pay attention to many interests at the same time, and knowing where and when to reload. It becomes clear that every aspect of the gameplay was meant to be as satisfying to the player as possible. From gun handling sounds to smoke of gunshots and sound effects, and finally the juicy explosion of hostile sausages after their final word.
Time to take a load off.
Said sausages have an advanced AI. Not only are they actively going on patrols in areas and investigating any suspicious sounds they hear, but they also react and get pressed by your consistent rapid fire and sometimes get knocked out and return to the fight if they have not suffered any lethal damage. This makes for much more interesting gameplay and encounters, especially with the wide variety of their weapon, armor and equipment. They do also actively utilize both lethal and non-lethal grenades, which is something you rarely see in games. The Take and Hold map was also well thought through, with each hold taking place in a different location that plays differently and provides much less repetitive experiences. While Take and Hold is the most popular game mode in H3VR, there's a ton of other very entertaining game modes, ranging from your classic shoot the targets kind of thing to gun range experiences, as well as the boom ski, which is basically you throwing grenades at targets and stuff like that. And one of my favorite, the meat grinder, which essentially throws you in a Soul-like Resident Evil vibe horror experience. It's very impressive. Now, generally speaking, you see two types of approaches to VR games. Some that completely disregard the graphics and go for something that's very stylized with polygonal shapes and simplified art style, and others that go for ultimate realism. H3VR is a rare case where it's really hard to categorize it in that regard. On one hand, the weapons and attachments are top of the line, with a lot of care put into them, but on the other hand, most maps are rather simplified, and only hoard the bare minimum in terms of details. There are some exceptions, such as the 45, beautifully designed gun range that is based on Hickok's 45 gun range, but it basically just kind of kills my frame rate personally. But overall, since your main focus is always on the guns, this doesn't come really as a huge annoyance. Some of the VFX are rather stylized and simplified, especially the smoke effect. It doesn't feel very genuine in my opinion. It feels like one of those classic Unity particle systems effect. It does the job, but it's kind of a letdown, in my personal opinion. In terms of optimization, the game runs buttery smooth most of the time and provides a lot of options to tune the settings. Maps are very well optimized, which allows for fluid gameplay, but things do get a little bit laggy when you get to a point where there is an uncontrollably large amount of enemies in the map. You will also run into some performance issues when trying out modded maps, since as far as I understand they don't seem to have access yet to the required tool to optimize the maps to the maximum level. Speaking of modding, the game has one of the largest, if not the largest, modding community out there for a VR game. The process of installing mods is very easy and straightforward. Mods integrate seamlessly into the game and rarely ever cause any crashes or frustration for me. Some of the mods even allow you to go as far as creating your own weapons from the most simple bare elements of guns, with modular systems allowing for truly near infinite amount of possibilities. Now that we've covered all that makes H3VR great, let's talk about some of the ugly things. As you've probably noticed, you don't quite fight actual human enemies in this game. The world of H3VR is ruled by Sussex, including yourself. Said Sussex have no hands, and so do you. While having controllers instead of hands allows for more precise controls, it really feels disconnecting, and I'd much rather have actual hand models or full body IK rig, where I get to see my actual hands and interact with the weaponry and the world. Personally, I think the hybrid approach of having hands plus a small part of the forearms or the arm, which is seen in Larsonauts and into the radios, is probably the best way to go in terms of saving tons of development on the developer while also looking acceptable and not breaking the immersion. Aside from the several experiences that do offer some interesting insights, there's no real story behind the world of H3VR, at least not that I know of. I'd really love to see a campaign story similar to campaigns seen in games such as Worms maybe, from Team 17, where you meet different teams and progress through a bizarre narrative, making your way through potential platforming and maybe even some boss fights along the way. Stuff like that helps you get more invested in the world and keep you attracted for a longer time, giving you something more to do in this world, since eventually Tech and Hold will get repetitive. Now keep in mind this game is still in early access and is still seeing a lot of improvement over the time, since Anton, the developer behind H3VR, has been constantly updating it while also publishing devlog. His most recent one talks about including full physical doors that can be destroyed with shotgun,
and just knock it down.
axes,
Open the correct way.
grenades,
That should definitely do it. Ha ha!
as well as opened with symbol jiggly keys.
As you can see, as we insert the key in and turn it like symbol actually turn it, these actually are able.
So, is H3VR worth the price? For being the most realistic gun simulator and setting a new bar for gun interaction and realism in games, as well as providing a vast variety of fun game modes, I'd say it's well worth the price. I'd give H3VR a solid 8.3 out of 10, with the potential of reaching 9 out of 10 if a solid campaign was to be implemented. Alright guys, that's gonna be it for today's review. I hope you guys found this informative as well as enjoyable. Thank you all for 200 subscribers. I wanna say a special thanks to all of my Patreons. We've got Trenton YouTube, and Trenton YouTube. Thank you guys for the amazing support. I couldn't do this without you guys. And with that being said, that's gonna be it for today's video. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.